Hello, and thank you for joining me again today. Today we are making this fall card using the Brutus Monroe September Inspiration Box called Autumn Sunrise. So I'm using just a few pieces from the card kit today, and the main piece we're going to use is this chipboard cutout that came in the kit, and I'm going to embellish it a little bit. The first thing I'm going to use is a Nouveau Glue Pen, and this has the really wide tip on it, so it makes it really easy to put a good layer of glue all over this die cut. Because what we are using next to put on here is the Nouveau Gilding Flakes, and I'm using the ones in Sun-Kissed Copper because I thought that would be a really nice warm metallic-y color for a fall card. Look how pretty and shiny that is. I think that gilding flakes are really beautiful, but they're also very messy, and I wouldn't recommend using a big handful like I just did right there. I think it's a lot easier if you take a little bit out at a time and rub it over the glued part of your project. And you can really use any kind of adhesive. You can even use a tape runner or double adhesive sheets if you want to die cut, different shapes with dies or anything like that. But it's kind of difficult to get it back in the container and then it gets everywhere. And I had just done my nails before this video, but I thought the way the gilding flakes stuck to my nail polish was super pretty, so there's a happy accident. The next thing you need to do is kind of scrape along the edges of your project and across the top to get any excess gilding flakes off. There is a lot here that we can take off and put back in our jar for another project. I just run my fingers along the edges of the cardstock and kind of over the top of it. And you want to get as much excess off as possible so when you send or give this card to someone, the flakes aren't just kind of falling off and getting everywhere when they open it. And then try to get it back in the jar, which it always kind of seems like there's more and it's not going to fit in the jar than when I started with. Once you have all the excess removed, then it's time for some final cleanup. And I keep this little cordless vacuum in my craft room, and I use it just for cleaning up messes like this. So it's right next to my desk and it sits there and charges. And it's really good at picking up all these little gilding flakes. It's good for embossing powder and glitter and anything you might spill, on your craft desk or around that you need to clean up. So I think that's a really handy thing to have. I also really like this brush. This is the Nouveau Surface Sweep brush. And it's really good at getting in some of those little crevices and corners and getting out some extra gilding flakes. And I also use it after I use embossing powder that has mica in it. And once you melt the embossing powder, you can use this brush just to get off any excess mica or any powder like that. The next thing I want to work on is the background for my card, and I'm using the Brutus Monroe Aqua Pigments for this, and I'm using a few different colors. I'm using Buttercup and Maple, which are both from the Aqua Pigment of the Month Club, and then I'm also using Penny, Red, and Pumpkin Guts, which is the one that's in that skull jar. The first thing I'm doing is just putting some drops of Aqua Pigments down on the cardstock. And I am using the Brutus Monroe Aqua Pigment paper for this. Once you have it covered with dots of the Aqua Pigment, I just took a spray bottle and sprayed a generous amount of water on there and then kind of moved it around just to let the pigments flow around. I did notice that the copper or the penny one wasn't really moving as well as the other ones were. So I just got out a little brush and just kind of broke the pigment up a little bit so it would move a little bit better for me. After I got that broken up a little bit, I just turned it over on my work surface and picked up some more pigment that was that had drained off onto the surface. And now I'm just drying it with my heated tool because I want to layer some colors, so I wanted to make sure the first layer was dry before I put on any additional layers. The next thing that I'm going to do is actually put the Aqua Pigments directly onto my work surface. And that'll give a little bit different of a look than putting that right on the paper. So after we have some drops on the work surface, I just dab my paper into it, move it all around, and pick up all of that color. And I think these colors really mix beautifully together. So then I dried that as well, and the last step we're going to do for our background is to put the aqua pigments onto an acrylic block. So I'll drop some different colors onto here, and I think this technique gives a little bit more of a concentrated pigment in certain areas when you stamp it down, rather than just like an overall blended look. So you get a little bit more texture when you do it this way. So we're going to go ahead and try that again so we can see what it looks like. So I did dry that again, and I'm doing one last layer with some of that penny aqua pigment in there to give it a little bit more of that metallic sheen. So I'll dry that up, and I really like the way this ended up. The next thing we need to do is to attach our leaf panel to our background. So I'm just using some liquid glue, going all around it, making sure I get every little area so it all sticks down really well. I think that our metallic leaf frame here looks really good against that aqua pigment background. And I think the penny aqua pigment in the background really pulls out that copper from the leaf panel and really ties it all together. The next thing we need to do is just to trim off the extra edges from our background. And I'm just using some scissors and trying to cut up as close as I can to that frame without cutting the frame. It's a little bit harder to do that when you get down to that bottom area where the leaf is extending past the frame, but I think it makes it look really nice to do that. I have an A2 size card base here that I want to put my panel onto, but I did want to lift it up a little bit and give it some dimension. And I like to use fun foam for that. So I look for the fun foam that's just in like the kids section at the craft store, and I buy the ones that have one side of adhesive already attached to them. And I buy the packs that have different colors in them and try to match the color of the foam as close to my card panel as possible, because you can see kind of under there and see the foam coming through it. So you want to make sure it doesn't stick out too much, or at least that it looks good with your card. So I just cut it down as close as I can to match the card panel, and then stick it on with the adhesive that's already on there. And then I just use my tape runner to go all along the other side so I can attach that to my card base. And I use the ATG gun, and I think that the ATG is a really nice and strong adhesive, and that's what I usually use to assemble my cards. So there is our assembled card. The next thing I wanted to do is stamp and emboss a greeting on there. And I first put it on some of that orange cardstock, but then I didn't really like how much of the leaf that covered up. And I wasn't sure if you could actually emboss over the gilding flakes, so I tried it, and it worked. But you don't want to keep your heat tool on there too much, or it will start to melt the gilding flakes. And here I'm using the Brutus Monroe Crisp Leaves embossing powder, and I think this is a really nice color to complement some of the red and darker colors in the background. The stamp I'm using is the Hello from a Winnie and Walter set called The Big, the Bold, and the Happy. I wanted to embellish it with something, and I thought a couple different colors of the Nouveau drops would be really good for this. And I always test them out on a scrap piece of paper first, because I don't want there to be any air bubbles that come out and ruin my project. So I'm just testing them out here and practicing a little bit before I go directly onto my project. You can see here that I did goof up a little bit, and I have a little tail of a Nouveau drop there where I don't want it. So I just take a blade and I just kind of scrape it along the cardstock to just move it back to where I want it. And that usually works really well at getting that color off of there. And it kind of, with this background, is a little more forgiving anyway because of the variation of color. So I added a few of the red and a few of the orange, And then I tap it down onto something like this is just a bottle of, or the jar of the embossing powder. And that helps kind of flatten and get out any peaks from your drops. I really liked the way this turned out, but I thought it needed something up in that right corner. I got the idea from my aunt. Thank you, Aunt Linda, to put just a strip of cardstock at a diagonal on there. So I covered a strip of cardstock in the Gilding Flakes and added that to the top. And then I used a little bit of twine that was in the September Inspiration Box to wrap around that strip. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. See you next time!